Today we're going to cover using the AViewer Accessibility Object Inspection tool. Steve is going to run through AViewer features and how it's used to attest accessibility information exposed in web content. Steve Faulkner is a TPG Distinguished Accessibility Engineer. He joined the Paciello Group in 2006 and was previously a Senior Web Accessibility Consultant at Vision Australia. He is the creator and lead developer of the Web Accessibility Toolbar Accessibility Testing Tool. Steve is also a member of several groups, including the W3C HTML Working Group and the W3C Protocols and Formats Working Groups. He's an editor of several specifications at the W3C, including HTML 5.1, using YARIA in HTML and HTML5 techniques for providing useful text alternatives. He also develops and maintains HTML5accessibility.com. I'm pleased to introduce Steve Faulkner for today's presentation.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here. I'm in my cave in Kings upon Thames in the United Kingdom. Can somebody tell me if my slides, you can see my slides? Because I can see them.
Yes, we can see them, Steve.
Great. Okay, so we're going to be talking about using AViewer today, and this is a tool that we developed in-house and that we use, and hopefully lots of other people use, for looking at accessibility information that's exposed in through the user interfaces mainly in web content. What I'm talking about is accessibility APIs, and we've had a number of presenters talking about these things today. So hopefully, if you've been listening to the other presenters, you'll have some idea. But these APIs, what they do is expose information to assistive technology in a standardized, uniform way across the various platforms, as in across OSs, Windows, Mac, etc. And some of these APIs, well, the main ones are MSAA, which is Microsoft Active Architecture, and that's one of the oldest APIs, and it's been subsumed or been overtaken in Microsoft eyes by UI automation, but much of the information in MSA is still used today by assist technologies, and I'll be showing that a bit later. Then there's iAccessible 2, which is sort of like a backpack for MSAA. iAccessible 2 is further development based on MSAA, and it adds extra roles and different accessibility properties. AX is the short name for the Mac OS X API, and STK is the one that the Unix Linux accessibility API. So these things all expose roles, states, properties, and interaction stuff. They also expose lots of other things, but these are the main things that we look at and are interested in for when we're testing. So this is my standard slide for explaining how things are hooked up. So essentially, if you've got something like a submit button, which is your standard HTML submit button, that it has an input device, which is in this case a keyboard, which is hooked into it. So when you do something with a keyboard, namely enter or spacebar, that activates the button. And then the button also has a range of that has a role and states and properties that are associated with it, which are hooked up to the accessibility API here. Things such as role of button, state of focus, the value. In this case, and for a button, the value becomes the accessible name in the API, which I'll show you a bit later. And that's this is the default value that is assigned when you don't actually define any for a submit button. You don't define a value for it, and it's got things like actions of press, and they all go in, and then they come out as a happy accessibility tree, and you know, a happy sort of organized set of information that assistive technology can use to convey the meaning of the user interface to the user. So I'm going to look at a few tools just to give you an idea of how we arrived at AViewer. One of the tools that I use, and which it does actually expose an accessibility tree, which is the Firefox DOM Inspector. And what that does is expose, you can actually go into it, not a lot of people know, but when that little drop down menu on the left, which looks like I don't know, it's got lots of dots on it. That I can't remember what it's actually called, but if you activate that, it normally shows the DOM tree, but then you can actually get it to show the accessibility tree. And that what it will do is it will show the accessibility tree that Firefox produces internally from the DOM tree. And so with you can see there, it's got associated accessible properties, etc. So that's one example, but you know, it's only for Firefox, and it's useful, but its utility is limited. And then we've got one of the old classics, which is inspect.exe, and inspect32.exe. Well, inspect32 is the classic. Then they sort of updated it to inspect, and this is one of the things that Microsoft provides. Unfortunately, they don't just provide it as some place where you can go and download it. You have to. It comes as part of the whole SDK, you know, the standard developer kit or whatever that SDK stands for. And so you've got to get a lot of stuff. And one of the things when you look at it is you can see that by default, you get a huge amount of information, and it's hard to actually get to the bits that are most useful for us. In this case, it's showing it's information about a graphic, which has a role of graphic, which is about the 5th line down, and it has a name, which is accessible name, and that's the alt text screenshot of AViewer, etc. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that's in there, and so also to keep in mind that these particular tools, most of these tools are built primarily for looking at applications in the desktop. They're not customized or they're not developed to be looking in particular at web content and what browsers exposed through HTML. Another classic, which is App Explorer, which is another part of the tools that Microsoft have provided for Yonks. And again, you see that you get an accessibility tree here, but and you get lots of stuff. But again, it's designed primarily for the desktop, and it doesn't have some of the features that I would like to have when I'm trying to test this stuff. And then there's ActProbe, which I call the Big Daddy because unlike the Microsoft tools, which only cover Inspect, only covers, and Act Explorer only cover MSAA, the ActProbe is a cross-platform tool, and it covers IA2, which is accessible to MSAA, and also SDK on the Linux platform. It doesn't work on the Mac because Mac have their own way of being, so to speak. So, but it's also a highly featured tool. You can get events, you can get one, but again, it has there's a lot of power to it. And one of the other things also is that it's a real resource hog. So I find that quite a lot of the time that it'll lock up my machine, or it doesn't work as well as it should. And again, it's not designed primarily for looking at web-based content. So before I go on to looking at the AViewer in more detail, what I would like to say is that there's a guy that I've worked with for the past 10 years now, a guy called Jun, who lives in Japan. He's Japanese. That's probably why he lives in Japan. But not saying that all Japanese people must live in Japan, but he's Japanese, he lives in Japan, and I have worked with him closely on the development of all the tools that I've worked on, which is the Web Accessibility Toolbar and the Color Contrast Analyzer and the A-Viewer. And it's a great working relationship because I essentially say to him, can you do this? And scribble some idea down in crayon and on a piece of scrap of paper, and I give it to him, and he creates the functionality for these tools. So a big call out to Jun, who's a very private person, and that's why I don't actually. I tried to find a picture of him, but I've only had one from about 8 years ago, and I couldn't find it. But anyway, just to let you know that this guy is a big has a bigger part in the development of these tools. So the A-Viewer, this is the tool, and when after looking at those other tools, you'll probably see there's a lot of similarity between the information, what you see in the A-Viewer and what is in these other tools. That's because we wanted to take the best of those other tools and apply them to a tool that we could use to look at web content. Now, the A-Viewer works with, well, it also has a feature that you can use it to look at desktop applications as well. But as that's not its primary function, you'd be better off using those other tools that I talked about previously. But what it does do very well is expose information about the accessibility information from the web content in Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Chrome. In Internet Explorer and Firefox, it is fully functional, that you'll get all the information, including the HTML code information. In Chrome, you don't, and the reason being for that is Chrome doesn't support some of the APIs, or doesn't expose the API to allow the tool to look at it, which is Simple DOM, which is essentially exposes the DOM tree, the HTML DOM tree. But anyway, so you don't get the code part in Chrome, but you do get the other bits. But it works fine in Internet Explorer and Firefox. So what's, as usual, I run ahead of myself. What's the difference between those other tools and A-Viewer? It takes the best of the rest and adds some. It simplifies the interface, and what I mean by simplifies it, that it by default it doesn't show a lot of the information that the other tools do. It's, as it says, it's minimize the default information display. You get multiple views in one, so you get the accessibility tree view, you get the detailed view about what particular API information is being exposed for a particular thing, and it has lots of other things. And you also get the code view. So when you're looking at a button that's in the for example, a button in the HTML, you'll actually see the HTML code, as well as the information about it coming from the accessibility tree, as well as the API, accessibility API information. So you've got it all there, and that's useful because you can see, well, in the code I put this attribute on there, but it's not coming up in the as it's not filtering through to the API. Why is that? Maybe it's the attribute is incorrect, or there's some fault with the browser, etc. So it's a good way of being able to debug these things. Okay, so just looking at the interface bits, we've got the main toolbar, which is across the top of the thing, and it's got lots of different things that it does. And the first button is watch focus, and so when you press that, what it means is as you tab through, which I'll be demoing a bit later, as you tab through focusable controls in the web page, that the information will be displayed about the accessibility information will be displayed about the focusable controls. Watch cursor does a similar thing. It means when you move your cursor over a particular piece of web content, for example, if the web content isn't focusable by default, but you still want to understand what the information is exposing, you can use the watch cursor. The show highlight rectangle essentially just means that it will put a highlight rectangle around any piece of code, whether you're using watch focus or watch cursor. It will highlight the actual code that the accessibility information is being displayed for. The show tooltip, which is actually now called show balloon, help balloon or something. What that means is that the same thing is you'll get the information that's in the details panel of and it'll make more sense when I show it, the detailed panel of the A viewer. You'll actually get that in line within as you either cursor through or tab through the HTML page. Copy text to clipboard just means that it'll copy the detail information and code for any particular thing that you've got that's currently being shown in the panel. The focus rectangle only. What this does is that it doesn't show any of the accessory information, but if you push watch cursor, watch focus, and then you press the yellow one or the focus rectangle only, it will highlight as you tab through the page. And so what that is useful for actually seeing where when you're checking for keyboard, it's useful to see that information. So it does the same thing as the red square does. It just means that you don't get the overhead of it actually trying to recalculate the accessibility tree every time you tab through the page. Then you've got these 4 buttons: the up, down, left, and right. What that is that if you're focused on a particular object, then if they will light up or become enabled, and you can actually move up and down and across the accessibility tree using those. And as it says, you can move up the parent object, first child object, etc. The 11 is show online help. There's not a lot of help there, but and as I mentioned before, there's desktop mode. And what this does is disable the HTML inspection features, and you'll just see the API information, because on the desktop, unless the control that if you're looking at a pane that is using in Windows, for example, that actually exposes stuff as HTML, then you'll be able to see the HTML, but otherwise you'll just be able to see the MSA information. So the other bits of the interface is the view menu. It's got 5 menu items. First one is select display. So you can select which of the APIs, and also if you want to see the HTML information and the ARIA information, you can select those in there, and that the panel on the top right panel that sort of decides which stuff you're showing. Okay, so for example, in UI automation, because it's not used that much, and by the assistive technology, I tend to have that turned off. But it's just so you can just filter stuff. The collapse just allows you. There's three panels within the application. You can collapse any one of those using that, as well as there's some. You can drag them and click them, and they'll close anyway. It's just another way of doing that. The tree view contents. When we look at the tree view, what you'll see, you can either look at the whole tree, which will be the tree for the whole document, or you can look at just it'll just show you the tree for the particular control that you're looking at that particular time and its children. The reason why this is useful is sometimes when the tree is very complex, that it takes a lot of computational power to actually produce the tree, and that make it sluggish. And so it's a way to circumvent that, but also you just might want to hone in on a particular part of the tree, and you're not interested in the rest of the stuff. So that's something that you can use for that. The language is just for localization, is currently only English and Japanese. And the balloon tip, which is the tooltip that I was talking about before, and that you can select which bits of information you want to actually show in the balloon tip. So these are the 3 panels. So the left, you've got the tree, which is the accessibility tree. on the right, you've got the details. And so as you can, in this example, we've got focus on the search button, and you get the accessibility information for the search button. Obviously, but you can't see it all because it's not there in the screenshot. But yeah, as you can see, we've got the accessible name of search and the accessible role of push button. This is the MSA information. The accessible state, which is focusable and focus, because it's actually got focus in the web page. It has a default action, etc. So there's all that information. Now, if you can also within there's a preferences dialog where you can actually remove that. So if you don't want to see a ACK keyboard shortcut, you can get rid of that in the preferences, so you don't actually have to see it in there. And as you can see here, there's the example with it's got the code, and you can actually see what we're looking at is a push button, and that's the code from the page that's telling us what's in the what the actual HTML code is. So now let me just find that. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go into the demos now. I've had 20 odd minutes of raving. Are there any questions about the tool before I start showing the demos? Sorry, Brian, I know you said at the end, but I just thought I'd have a little rest.
That's okay, Steve. We haven't seen any questions posted yet.
Okay. I see someone's typing, but they're probably just telling me. Okay, let's see the demos, says Mike. Okay, are there any plans to port Avio to Mac, like color content analyzer? That is one question that comes up often. Not at this stage, purely because we don't have the people that can do it. If we had someone that with the chops to do it, we would have done it, but we don't. So Steve Lee says things like a little like accessorizer for GNOME. Yeah, I was actually trying to find that. I can never remember the name of it, Steve. And yeah, it's a similar tool, just like that's similar to there's similar tools for the Mac. But again, there's none of these tools actually are developed for looking at the accessible information specifically coming out of web pages. That's the difference. Anyway, let's see the tool in action. Okay, so I have some examples here. So can everybody, hopefully I'm going to say everybody's in my screen, but yeah. So I've opened up the toolbar, and as you can see in all its glory. So what this page contains a number of different examples. So what we have first is a standard button, and so I can use the watch cursor and the watch cursor and the sorry, my phone's just bleeping at me. The watch cursor and the show focus rectangle. And so what I'll do is I've just hovered over the search button, and as you can see, it shows me the search button. It shows me a range of information. Now, as you can see there, it doesn't actually show in Firefox. It doesn't show the HTML of the button. The reason why this is that the API that allows you to extract the information in Firefox shows you the inner HTML. And so as this is a void element, it's an input type button that doesn't have any inner HTML, so you don't actually see it. What I'd have to do to see the code for the button is actually move outside of to the P element that the button is contained in, and then I get the inner HTML for that. So it's just something to watch out for if you're using it, and just realizing that if we looked at it in an IE, IE does show the inner HTML shows you the outer HTML. So it will show you the button code for void elements, show you the code for void elements, but in Firefox it doesn't. So anyway, so let me just turn that off for a sec. Now, so what we get is we get the MSA information, because I've got that. We also get the IS Accessible 2. Now, what you'll notice in lots of cases is that IS Accessible 2 has similar or the same information. So it has the accessible name and has the same role, and it has similar states. But essentially it's they're the same information, but it's not always the case. And also IS Accessible 2 has something that called accessible relations, which when we talk about ARIA relationship attributes, like ARIA labeled by and ARIA described by, etc., these are actually coming from the IE Accessible 2 ideas or concepts of these, and that's what they hook into. So when you do ARIA labeled by, which I'll show you, it creates a label by relationship in IE Accessible 2. So that's, as I said, that's the additional things that IE Accessible 2 does. And also IE Accessible 2 has some things called object attributes, which shows more information about so it actually exposes some HTML information about the object, which MSAA doesn't. So you get stuff like the tag name, you get CSS information, etc. You get display values. Yeah, hold on. Oh, sorry, it's just Rich giving me about something. So it's, yeah, so hot breaking news is that SVG2 has WebKit implemented tab index in SVG2. If you didn't pick it up, that's why I'm getting those pings from Rich. So one thing to note here is that this shows ARIA information. That ARIA information is the information that will be exposed in the DOM. It's not actually exposed in the API, but it's in that way. It's just that it's useful to see it there in this part of the interface. And also you get the HTML information there as well as UI information. One of the other things I wanted to show you about using this is that, for example, okay, we've got a H2. Firefox exposes the accessible roles of things that don't have an accessible role in MSAA as something called BST string, which is essentially the tag name. So that gets exposed as, but it's not something that is standardized, and other browsers don't do it, or some other browsers don't do it, like Internet Explorer. So if we were looking at this in Internet Explorer, we wouldn't get a H2 role. We would get I think it's just a text. It doesn't actually even show it as a container or whatever. Anyway, what I wanted to show you was that one of the things you can do, as well as hovering over a certain thing in the page, once you've got the tree there, you can actually walk the tree from the tree. You can actually walk the tree using the arrow keys, and you can open, it's a tree, so you can use the up and down, left and right arrow keys and actually walk through the dominant. What you'll see, if you can see, is that the focus rectangle moves along with the thing. So it's a good way of interrogating the information that's there, and be able to look at it through there. So you can actually just walk through the accessibility tree within ActView, and it'll show you where you are on the page. That's what I wanted to show you for that. How are we going for time? Okay, I've got plenty of time. So one of this actual example I've got here, and what this is one of the, it's a blog post I wrote about just use a HTML button, and the reason being is that what we have at the start here, sorry, okay, what we have here is a standard HTML button, and what we get is we get all the appropriate information provided through the Accessibility API. And then what we often see is you get things that look like buttons and act like buttons for some users, but are not actually buttons. So in this case, we've got an image, which with an on-click associated with it. And as you can see here very quickly is that it has no accessible name. So it has no label, nothing, and it's exposed as a graphic because that's what it is. It's just an image. And so something that acts like a button for some users and has a label, etc., is also keyboard accessible. It's also mouse accessible. Is not, you can't actually get to it with a keyboard. So this is what this is showing is some of the things you have to do in order to make something that's not a button into something that acts like a button. So as we move down, what I've done here is this next one is an image with on-click and alt. And if we focus on that, we can see now this graphic has an accessible name because I've given it an alt. And so now it's got an accessible name. It still has the incorrect role, and it's still not keyboard interactive. So there's still things that need to be done. So the next one, if we look at the next one down, okay, so this is an image. What we've done now is add, and if we look down here, let's see, we've added an ARIA roller button, and that is exposed here, so it shows up, so we know that there's a roller button, and that is actually filtering through into the accessibility APIs, and there, and as you can see in the iAccessible2, it's there. So it's starting to build up to a point where it's actually starting to be a meaningful button, but still we have some issues with it. One of them being that it's not keyboard operable. The other, it's not operable or focusable. So then what we have to do something else, which is then add a tab index to it. And as you can see that once we add a tab index to it, it gets an act state focusable. So we're getting closer. But if we click it, we get it. It works. The on-click works. But if we try to, I'm just pressing the enter key and the spacebar key, which is what I expect a button would make the button activate. Nothing happens, and that's because even though it's focusable with the keyboard, it doesn't have the required event handlers or the standardized event handlers that you would expect for a button. So the next step is that I've now in this one it's now had those required keyboard event handlers added. So now when I either use the spacebar key or the enter key, it will react. Oh no. Okay. So what have I? For some reason it's not working. Anyway, let me try it again. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so it works. So now after all that, after adding all this loads of code, as you can see, if we look at it here, we can see the code. So now we've got an image that's got an alt, it's got a role, it's got a tab index, and yes, we've got online inline event handlers. I've done this because it's just easier to show for the example, but of course we shouldn't use inline event handlers. But anyway, so you can see that it's got the event handlers, and so we've had to do all that, but which this basic button has, don't have to do any of that. All you've got to do is add a value to it, which becomes the accessible name. Oh, well, you got the on click, but I don't know why I've got typing. Oh, the type, yeah, type equals button. But so what it's showing is that all of the other stuff you have to add when you use a native control, you get it all for free. Okay, so other examples. What I'll also show you here is an example of what I was saying about the balloon tooltip before. So if we have the on focus and the on focus, the show highlight rectangle and the balloon tip, what we can do is step through the, and you'll get that MSA information, for example, in line. And so obviously if it's not focusable, it won't, so it steps over that one, but then you get the information. So as can be seen there. So that's the example of the focus. And just showing you an example of navigates to the parent object. And in this case, the parent object of the search button was the P element. And so we were able to navigate up the tree to what its logical parent was. Okay. So here we go. Okay, so what I'll look at now is I'll look at some labeling, some examples of labeling. So what we got here is we've got labeling of 4 controls. So we've got a control label using for an ID. So okay, so you can actually see the code there, and you see the 4, and you can see the ID. And so it's just a standard input with a 4 and ID. What I was talking about before, it being and this is actually a particular relationship which is shown. Oh, that's because I'm on the P, isn't it? Okay. So if we get onto the checkbox itself, we can see that it has a relationship, a label by relationship. So, and this is a IA2 thing. It's not an ARIA thing. It's just that ARIA allows you to set this IA2 label by relationship. And so what you can do is if you click on the well, that's the reason why that's happening. If you click on the press the relationship by the relationship target here, it will actually on screen it'll actually highlight what the actual where the particular control is being labeled by. It's just useful for actually seeing this X is labeled by Y, where is Y, there is Y type thing. So, and it's just an example of the wrapped label. Now, quite often people talk about the having a 4 IDs, the explicit relationship, and having a wrapped label is a implicit relationship. When you actually have a look, what you'll actually find, hopefully it won't put the light to it, but the relationship is there. It's an explicit relationship in both cases within the Accessibility API. It's exactly the same relationship that occurs for an ID and the label wrapped. So as I mentioned before, ARIA label, and you wouldn't do this with an ARIA label on a standard checkbox, is because the reason being is because unlike the label relationship, whether it be wrapped or 4 ID, you can't click on an ARIA label and activate the checkbox, whereas you can with a normal standard HTML label. So what we see here, and as I was showing you before, is that we'll get that again. We've got that same label by relationship, and that's the label target is there. So the ARIA label by, ARIA label by is exactly the same relationship as the label element. It just has some different behaviors. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I wanted to get across is that ARIA itself isn't an accessibility API, but what ARIA allows you to do is set for the HTML author to set these accessibility, these properties and roles within the accessibility API, where previously they could only be set by the browser themselves. It sort of opens the door to actually setting those properties by the author. The ARIA label. Okay, let's have a look at the ARIA label. So ARIA label is an attribute that goes onto the checkbox itself. Let's see, you open that up a bit, you can see we've got an ARIA label here. It's label text, and it's very, but you can't physically see it. But when we look at the accessible name, what we see is the accessible name is label text. That's because ARIA label maps to the accessible name in the accessibility APIs, but it would be MSAI accessible to, or indeed UI automation. It's all the same. Now, let's have a look at the title attribute. Again, and one thing to note here is that in the absence of any other form of labeling, whether it be ARIA labeled by or label element or whatever, then the browser maps the title attribute to the accessible name. So what we see here is the accessible name for that is label text, and that's coming from the title attribute, and that's the same throughout them all. It's sort of like a label or accessible name of last resort. The other thing, as you can see, just while we're looking at this checked, is that you can see here in the accessible state is an accessible state checked. One of the other things which is quite nice about AView is that actually when you look at the default action, you can actually activate, because this is exposed, the action is exposed as an accessible action. You can actually uncheck and check it from, so you can actually check to see if the default action actually works from there. You can see, if you can see that as I click on it or press on it, the actual in AViewer, it's activating that through the accessibility API. It's activating it, and that's how the assistive technology, they will activate the default action from there, and that's how it gets conveyed through to the actual action gets conveyed to the web page. We've got ARIA label and description here. So in this case, we've got a box, and we've got the accessible name of label, and we've got an accessible description, or ARIA described by of sorry, there it is. You can see here, so we've got ARIA described by of desk, and we've got the label, the accessible name is coming from the label, and ARIA described by is coming from that. So it's referencing the ID value of the container with that text in it. So again, if we look at the what we can see here is we've got, right, move back to what we can see here is, as far as we've got a described by relationship, which is the IO2 property, relationship attribute property. And if we say, okay, so the relationship target is this, and so and we can see it there. So that's how it's actually hooked up. It's not, ARIA is allowing us to set this relationship property or type within iAccessible2. And again, UI automation also has currently labeled by, currently described by. As you can see here, that in Firefox, for example, that it's not actually hooked up, because we don't need to hook it up because it's provided through iAccessible2 and MSAA. One of the things that this is just an example of where you get about, it's not often, but well, it's not all the time, but it's not uncommon to see an input with a label and a for value where the for value is not referencing an ID value, it's actually referencing the name value. and because people think, well, that's what it should be. They think that ID and name are interchangeable. And what this does is just show that it's not, because we've got the 4, and as we can see here, because it's using the name, not the ID, that there is no accessible name. It just doesn't work. And that's why it doesn't work, because it's not hooked up in the accessibility APIs. It doesn't expose the name text as a sorry. Yeah. Well, anyway, this isn't actually working. I know why. But anyway, don't worry. This wouldn't work even if it would. But it wouldn't work because the name of import. But it doesn't work. That's the main point. Don't do it. Don't reference the name text. Okay. So how are we going now? We've got 47. I'll just show you quickly an example of these. And this is a table. So we've got a HTML table with, and remember this is the inner HTML, so it's not actually showing the table itself. But we've got, and this is an example of where we've got we've got nested tables and tables used for layout. And so what you can see here is that when we look at the tree, that you actually got that everything gets shown. So, but then if we look at the second table, and this second table is using role equals presentation, and what we find. Anyway, I'm starting to lose it a bit here. What this example is designed to show is that you can use roles equals presentation to actually hide stuff in the tree, and it does work. I don't know what I've done here to bugger it up, but it does actually work. But essentially, putting role equals presentation will actually remove the roles, remove the table from the tree. So, what else? I think I've showed you enough and I've talked enough. Now it is time for some questions.
Steve, thanks very much. I did post one question in the Q&A. It was from Matt. He says generally on-click works with the keyboard if you use a button or the A. Is that not the same if you have a graphic with role and tab index?
Yeah, because if you use a button, yeah, it has default actions assigned. So it has default events assigned. If you use a graphic, it's a non-interactive element. That's why you have to add the keyboard event handlers. So, for example, if you make a button out of a link, you can activate it with the enter key, but you also need to add so you don't have to actually add the enter key functionality, but you have to add the spacebar functionality if you've coded it as to be a button with a role equals button, because the standard method for activating a link is activating a button is to use the spacebar, and also you need to prevent the default action from bubbling up and making the link try to navigate as well is another thing. I mean, all things point to use standard controls, but while things point to that, it's not often that people actually take heed of the signpost.
Good. Okay, one other question we got was which versions of Windows does AViewer support?
to be honest, well, it works in 8.1. It works in 7. It works in 8. I don't know if it works in XP. I think it does. I think we had it working in XP. With if you're going, I think that UI automation information is only exposed correctly in later versions of Windows, only because they hadn't implemented the UI automation in those. So I think that yeah, I don't know if it was 7, but UI automation is exposed correctly in 8. So does that answer the question?
I think,
Oh, Steve.
was there any other questions?
Okay. Oh, thanks,
Well, I
Dale.
think we're all
Yes.
set.
I'm not going to mention any of that, Dale. I promised. Didn't you see my tweet yesterday? I said I won't mention anything about web standards BigQuery. But I will say that there's 2 organisations developing HTML. Both start with W. One of them is evil. You work it out for yourself. Any other questions? Yeah, I'm on 8.1 as well, Steve Lee, and it works fine for me. It may be, I don't know, they have to. So, are there any other questions for me, or are you all talking between yourselves? I don't mind.
Thanks very much, Steve. We appreciate it. That concludes this presentation.